Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this session today. I'm Ann Graybill, Associate Head of School. Characterizing remote and hybrid learning as having highs and lows is something of an understatement. As a community of friends and colleagues, we have navigated over the last 7 months the broadest possible register of experience and emotion. Indeed, a search of my school email since March of this year yields 77 separate instances of the word apocalypse. 2020 has required that each of us at Blake revision every aspect of our relationships with the school and with one another. Last spring, with less than 2 weeks' notice, we transformed Blake's entire academic program into a remote format, our Remote Teaching and Learning Plan, or RTLP, to allow all students, PK-12, to complete their courses and curriculum for the school year. This summer, we revisioned school yet again as we planned for the fall. In our Hybrid Teaching and Learning Plan, or HTLP, half of our middle and upper school students attend class in person each day, and lower school students in small pods alternate between days with a classroom teacher and with their teaching assistant. We added bipolar ionization units to every air handler in our HVAC system, installed cameras and microphones in every learning space on every campus, hired nearly 30 new employees, added acrylic dividers between seats in the dining halls, created new floor plans for every classroom, and asked faculty, once again, to reimagine the structure, rhythms, and content of courses that would be meeting for half the usual time, with half the usual number of students, all sitting 6 feet apart and unable to work in small groups, to share materials, or to see each other's full faces. One of the things that I love most about Blake is a quality that a former lower school colleague described as one of being singularly unself-satisfied. Here, students and adults alike always want to find a way to do things differently and do things better. And at no time has that commitment been more valuable, more exhausting, or more visible than the present. And I'm so pleased that you will have the opportunity today to hear from Maggie Bowman, Jim Spector, and Emma Hausman about their experiences last spring and this fall. Please note that you can post questions throughout the program. To do that, use the Q&A button located at the bottom middle of the Zoom screen. Click Q&A and then type your question. We will monitor your questions throughout the program. Maggie, Jim, and Emma will have time to address those questions after the presentations have concluded. We will get to as many of them as possible. With no further ado, I'm very much pleased to turn this presentation over to Blake sophomore, Emma Hausman.
Hi, I'm Emma Hausman, and I'm a sophomore at Blake this year. I was in Ms. Bowman's Ancient Roots of Modern Thought class last year during our time remote learning. Ms. Bowman is beginning her 4th year as a social studies teacher at Blake. Before teaching at Blake, she taught for 1 year on the East Coast while finishing her master's degree in philosophy and ethics from Yale University. She also coaches cross-country and track at Blake. Ms. Bowman says that her favorite parts of teaching are building students, creating a curriculum that encourages students to think about the world more critically.
Hi everyone, it's nice to meet you. As Emma said, my name is Maggie Bowman, and I was asked by a number of Blake administrators to sort of give my insight into what this whole adventure has been in our remote and hybrid learning plans at Blake. So that's a big ask, as Dr. Graybill said, because of all of the ways that this has been complicated and new to us, but I'll do my best to give you a little bit of insight. I'm going to do a little bit of screen sharing, so hopefully you guys can see and get some insight into things. And then as I go, again, feel free to just post some questions. So I'm going to open this up so that hopefully you can see all the things here. And here we go, as long as all the technology works. So this is remote and hybrid, the joys and woes of teaching and learning during a global pandemic, of course. Emma and I thought that we would start this little part of the presentation with some back and forth, perhaps. So we're going to demonstrate how some of our classes last spring started on Zoom. So here we go. Good morning, class. Hi. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Oh, Emma, I can't hear you. Emma, are you on
Oh,
mute?
sorry, I was on mute.
You're muted. Okay, there you go. Oh, your internet, it's kind of, it's cutting in and out. Oh, it's okay. Turn your screen off and we'll figure it out. Okay, so there you have it. That's some of the weirdness of some of the learning and the classes that happened last year. I have some themes that I'm going to go through, but we thought we would just sort of start out that way. Oh, there we go. That was the beginning.
Thank you.
And Emma, will you just mute yourself for a minute? That would be great. So, some of the logistical problems, perhaps, is some of the things that I thought I would start with. So, a number of my classes started with something along the lines of, Miss Bowman, I couldn't come to class because my internet wouldn't work. And then I had to simply say, okay. And then, you know, the next day a student emails me and said, Miss Bowman, my dog is coming to class with me today. And then I said, okay. And then, you know, Miss Bowman, I have to babysit my little brother during our class tomorrow, so I won't be in class. And of course, then my answer is, okay. And part of that is just sort of embracing the awkwardness of this and rolling with the punches. Trying to decide how to do school and conduct classes in a way that was not the norm in the way that any of us had done this before. There's a video that I want to share briefly. And to give a little bit of context, it is a video that I created with one of my teaching partners from last year. And it was one of our first attempts to sort of create an intro to a class, one of our first attempts to sort of do this technology. It gives you a little insight perhaps into why the idea of creating classes virtually was perhaps a challenge, especially to those who have not used some of this technology before. I am, believe it or not, one of the younger members of the Blake faculty, and I oftentimes get questions from some of my other colleagues regarding how to use particular technology. So this will just give you a minute of insight into sort of our lives that I happen to capture. So here we go. This one. Oh, wait for it. With our faces, because the camera keeps our like faces in the corner, so it would be like double the faces.
That would be trippy.
If we were both looming, it would be like 4 faces of Miss Bowman. Hello.
Okay. All right, I have it up and going.
Me too.
All right, you ready?
Ready.
Well, what are we going to say first? Maybe that would be,
Oh, right.
or should it just be extemporaneous?
Extemporaneous is always my favorite. We should also set a timer because, you know, it's like 90 seconds, right?
And we could go on for hours, I'm sure.
We shall sometimes. Okay, ready? Go.
All right, hang on. Hold on.
That was the
Yes,
most
my entire screen.
that was the most anticlimactic start we've ever had.
Here, why won't it let me do that? Oh, wait. Your entire screen or an application?
Yeah, just do your entire
Oh,
screen.
yes.
Click on it.
Okay, I got it.
And then it should give you a little countdown where it says 3, 2, 1. Magic.
What? Well, maybe it didn't do it. Now I have to try again. Jesus Christ. Recording like somewhere.
I'm recording, so I think it's great. Okay, so we sort of get the idea that there were some, oh boy, now I gotta go back here, that there were some difficulties, and there are some difficulties with doing and inventing the classroom new and starting over. And you're currently watching one of those right now because I can't find where the Zoom went, where the presentation went. But there we go. Okay, So those are some of the logistical sort of problems that we encountered, and hopefully there's some humor in there. One of the things that we really felt like we needed to give to the students was this idea that it was new for everybody and that we were all sort of in this together. My teaching partner, Corey, who you saw in that video, we definitely discussed the question of, should we just show them the end of the video where we eventually got the recording to work and said the things that we needed to? But we decided not to. We decided to give them the entire video as sort of a way to say, we're in this together and we're all gonna figure out how to do this new way of school. But after some of those logistical problems, there were some moments of joy and sort of finding beauty in the newness. One of the things that Blake did was individual conferences with students, mostly on a weekly basis, with some students on a daily basis. The beauty of our remote schedule last spring was that every teacher between 1 and 3 p.m., Monday through Thursday, had 2 hours of just open office hours where students could come in and to our Zoom classrooms and ask questions or talk about a project. And that's something that we really encourage when everyone is on campus, but that doesn't always happen in the busyness of the schedule or in the day-to-day task list that all of us have. And so for me last spring, that was a beautiful, beautiful moment, a joy of virtual learning, is these anywhere from 3 to 10-minute conversations with students one-on-one that I got to have every day of the week, and conversations that I really don't think would have happened if we were in a in-person learning situation. Emma, do you want to say anything about those online conferences?
Yeah, is my audio quality really bad?
Nope, you're okay right now.
Okay, great. I really loved office hours during remote learning, and it gave me a real opportunity to connect with my teachers, because that's something that you miss when you're on Zoom, because you can't just, call a teacher over to your table and ask them a question. And this was sort of my opportunity to ask individual questions and further my thinking, especially in a class like English and social studies. And it was truly what made remote learning for me work. And I don't think I could have done as well as I did during remote learning if it wasn't for.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. She and I definitely agreed that Blake did a great job of creating this schedule where our classes and our sort of synchronous time together was a little bit shorter per class per week, but that opened up this opportunity for office hours, which offered this incredible time to have relationships one-on-one with students. So that was one of the joys. Another one of the joys was, I think collectively, I had the best 9th grade research papers that I've ever received from during my time at Blake thus far. And I think part of that was because of those conversations that we got to have, and because of the fact that students were home and had this sort of ongoing project, and they really had the opportunity to take the afternoon hours to dive into a research project, to dive into looking at a topic that they were interested in, and really sort of had the luxury in some ways of exploring. Some of the research papers that my 9th graders turned in were truly, truly phenomenal. And I'll show you a couple examples of those in just a minute. The last moment of joy that I would say was, of course, there's nothing about being in a global health pandemic that is joyful for the most part. But at the time last spring, I was teaching a course that's an ethics course, and it's titled Moral Issues in the Modern World. And it's a class that's built on having conversations and discussions around ethics and morality and policy. And I didn't have to work very hard to create a syllabus for that class. The juniors and seniors who are in that discussion-based class, I think really had a phenomenal experience because they were in a class on ethics as they were watching an unprecedented ethical dilemma develop and unfold in front of their eyes. We talked about that from all sorts of different perspectives, and that was a moment that if we were not in the middle of a global pandemic, they wouldn't have had that experience. So of course, I am not saying that I'm happy that COVID happened by any means, but it was sort of this joy that came out of that situation that we were all put in. This is an example of one of those great 9th grade projects that was turned in. 9th grade, for those who don't quite remember, right, is students who are 14 and 15 years old and are doing some pretty advanced thinking. So this thesis belongs to Emma, so I'll just read it for us. Beginning prior to the Common Era and continuing through the 21st century, Egyptians, Romans, and Christians feared and consequently oppressed Jews. The continuity of this fear and oppression, which evolved in motivation and execution, suggests similar fear and oppression of Jews will continue as historians predict the developed world evolves into a society dominated not by Judeo-Christian traditions, but by atheism or agnosticism. There are a lot of things going on in this particular paper, in this particular project. And this 9th grade student who had completed 1 year of high school was able to sort of make ties between the ideas and many of the sort of skills that we had been working on in 9th grade so far. The idea of oppression and fear and motivation, and then also the evolution of religious history in the world, that's a pretty mature topic for a 9th grader. Emma, do you want to just say a few words about how you sort of found this topic or why that was intriguing to you?
Sure. So I'm Jewish, and I find it to be a really big part of my identity. And, you know, growing up, and still I hear in services, we read all of these stories of oppression during Bible stories. And it occurred to me that there really was never a time period where there wasn't anti-Semitism and hatred against Jews. And as we talk about the Holocaust, and as Holocaust survivors are slowly, you know, becoming less, there are slowly becoming less and less Holocaust survivors that are living, and, you know, anti-Semitism is on the rise again in the U.S., I really thought that examining how it has changed and how it will continue to evolve with the dominant, I guess, belief in the world was really interesting to me. And I found a lot of interesting things while researching, particularly about the Middle Ages.
Awesome, thank you. So again, Emma is a current sophomore, which means when she turned this paper in, she was a freshman. So pretty mature and advanced thinking for a freshman in high school, and some of the best papers that I had received. Another quick and final example of this is a thesis that was turned in by another student who was talking about Socrates and Martin Luther King Jr. And his thesis reads, "The contrasting beliefs held by Socrates in the year 399 BCE and Martin Luther King Jr. in 1963 regarding obeying or rebelling against laws were legitimized by their perceived justness of their respective governing bodies. Athens being generous and providing to Socrates, whereas King perceived America to be built on the foundation of oppression. Simply, Socrates argued to uphold the law and King argued to rebel against the law because the government of Athens had provided for Socrates, whereas America did not provide sufficiently for Dr. King." So again, a lot happening here. This student is researching the ancient world, current or more recent political developments in the United States. And another sort of moment of joy that came out of this is this student was investigating and sort of interrogating the relationship between these two iconic figures and their governments in the weeks before we ended up having some civil unrest in the city of Minneapolis. And this student then emailed me a few weeks later and said, "Ms. Bowman, I'm so excited that you gave me the opportunity to do this research paper on obeying and rebelling and ethics and law and government," because he's felt that it really helped him understand current events. And I really do believe that Blake's remote system in the spring allowed the students just this luxury of time again that I don't think in a quote unquote normal school year we often have. And that's because there were these hours, these times where they could work independently, where they could talk to teachers. And these projects that my 9th graders gave were some of the best that I've ever seen. Another couple of things to just briefly mention, and pretty soon I'll turn it over to my colleague, Jim Spector. A couple goals for me that I developed last spring and then those that have continued to roll into this fall would be this idea of saving quote unquote synchronous time for activities that cannot be accomplished asynchronously. So things like discussion, debate, particularly challenging curriculum that I don't think students want to or necessarily can navigate by themselves. I really try right now to prioritize that sort of engagement in the classroom because students do have hours and minutes that they're spending outside of this synchronous time where they can be reading independently or working independently. And I try to really prioritize that in-class time for that kind of engagement. My second goal that I would say would be that I try not to sacrifice student-faculty relationships for content coverage. That's something that our faculty has been having a lot of conversations about this fall, especially. This idea that it can't be an either or. We have to do student-faculty relationships and we have to do content. And to get rid of either one would sacrifice the integrity of a Blake education. So that's something that I think about most days. Am I making sure that with this time that we have together in class, am I getting to the aspects of community and creating those relationships, and also working through the content and that sort of rigorous, challenging academic experience that is true to the place that Blake is. I'm actually going to skip this for now, but the last thing to just talk about briefly is another example of some work that was done last spring. This was a way to, when we were in remote learning, try to create some sort of engagement with students. So I gave them a number of documentaries that they could choose to watch. And this was that health class that I mentioned for, not health class, excuse me, ethics class for juniors and seniors. The documentaries were The Great Hack, which is about the 2016 election and some of the ways that data and social media were utilized. The documentary 13th, which is sort of this documentary about slavery and also the system of incarceration in the United States and how the 13th Amendment plays into both of these different systems. Icarus is about doping in sports. Dirty Money is about big banks. There's What the Health, which is sort of this relationship between the nutrition and healthcare industry, and also then the industries involved in food production. And students had a choice, so they could consume whichever of these documentaries they wanted to. And then they had to get together with a group of 3 to 5 people over Zoom and have a conversation and discuss the film through the lenses that we had talked about in class. So utilitarianism and the question of individual rights and collective good, Immanuel Kant and his categorical imperative, voices of historically marginalized communities in the context of feminism, and critical race theory, public versus private, justice versus love, all of these different lenses that we had talked about over the course of the semester. This was another just example of a project that I created specifically for the remote learning scheme, and one that we wouldn't have been able to do in class as well, or we would have had to do it differently because of the choice that students had, because of the ability to get together and to talk and to really sort of investigate topics that they were interested in and topics that they felt passionate about and wanted to discuss with their fellow students. I think we are sort of coming up on my time, which is great. And here we go. I'm more than happy to answer questions as you go. So if you have questions for me, feel free to put them in the Q&A. And then at this point, I will stop screen sharing and turn the presentation over to my colleague, Jim Spector. Thank you for listening.
Thank you all for attending this talk. I was asked last spring by Dr. Graybill to discuss from my perspective what we're doing with remote teaching and beyond, and that was a long time ago. So with the 20 minutes that I have set aside to talk to you, I hope to bring up a couple of points. One is I want to set the context for what we're used to in teaching at Blake, and then talk about what the remote experience was like last spring, and then talk about what we're involved with currently in the hybrid system. I've been teaching at Blake for about 15 years. I think this is my 16th year. And I've been a school teacher for a little bit over 20 years. And I'm a visual arts teacher. And I specialize in working with, teaching students how to work with clay, which is a very hands-on process. So the thought of teaching clay online was kind of a very difficult idea to wrap my head around. I'm used to hands-on instruction, and scenes like I'm going to show you is what my experience has been. with teaching. And it's probably similar to what you remember when you were in school. The art studios are places, or have been places, where kids would work together and they would use their brains in very different ways than in other classes. And we at Blake value this very much. So we have extensive studios where students can explore their creativity and be individuals. And also, kind of the dovetail onto one of the later points that Maggie brought up, I think in particular the art experience for students at Blake helps generate a sense of community where students are working together frequently and they're socializing as they're working. They're getting to know people in different ways than they would in other classrooms. And that is a big motivator to me in my teaching is watching students learn about who they are. And it's a real privilege for me to interact with students in ways that are maybe in some ways much less threatening, or at least they might think, than in a strictly academic setting. So the question that I had last spring was knowing that we weren't going to come back. The writing was on the wall that we were not going to come back to school and that we would go to a remote system. How can I help reproduce a experience where it's a very hands-on experience and much of the learning happens through physical manipulation of materials. The experience that I had prior to this with online teaching was primarily guided by when we had snow days in which we were given instruction to provide lessons for the students to work at home and then do the best we could. So my interpretation of what I was going to do that would be useful would be to provide instructional videos for the students to watch, and then they would take the information that they took from those videos back into the classroom and put them into practice. And that was fine on a limited basis, but I couldn't imagine doing that for an entire quarter, which is what it was going to be, the fourth quarter. And I was thinking for a very long time, what in the world am I going to do? What am I going to send the students home with potter's wheels? And then I thought to myself, well, no, we can't do that, but we can send the students home with clay and some very simple supplies. So last spring, we made a mad dash for putting together a whole bunch of supplies. Each student took home a block of, I would say, about 15 pounds of clay and some tools. And then we hit the ground running in the spring. And the students then were given lessons through online means. And let me see if I can get into this. And then it was almost like business as usual, where the students would follow through with assignments and work on their own time. And when we got together as a full class through our Zoom meetings, that time was reserved for discussion and analysis. And they were rather short classes. I can't remember if they were 45-minute classes or 30 minutes. It's been such a long time ago that I really can't even remember the time frame. But what I do remember was that the interactions that the students had among each other on our Zoom calls, where the students were able to see everybody, the interactions were fantastic. And the thoughtfulness of the students, perhaps like Maggie was referring to, was even deeper than previously. And I'm not sure exactly why. There was a big difference between the way I conducted class in the spring versus the way I typically would conduct class in the school building. I had always prioritized in the school building that students use as much of the class time as possible to work on their studio projects. And the reason for that was that I wanted to minimize the discussion because I think they get a lot of discussion and question and answer in their other classes. And the studio is a place for something different. So I really valued that time. Well, because that wasn't happening in the springtime, when we did meet as a class, it was almost a flipped version of what I had done in the past, and it was all discussion. And that's something that I learned how effective that could be in teaching of studio arts, the discussion part of the assignments. So the semester, just kind of in a timeline, the semester went on, and we were going through the curriculum, and the students, what you just saw was an example of the design of a individualized chess set, where students were asked to create the different pieces based on their own interests. And another assignment, which would have been something that they would do in the school building too, was to create a container out of clay that, in this case, somehow gives the viewer an indication of what the container is holding on to. So business as usual, pretty much. It was fun for me, and I think for the other students, to get a glimpse through Zoom into the individual lives of their classmates. And it was fun to see where the students decided to do their clay work. I had some preliminary instruction on how not to mess up your parents' nice dining room table and protective measures you could take. And one funny incident, there was one student last semester in the spring who always Zoomed in before everyone else. And I enjoyed having kind of conversations with her, asking her how her experience has been going. And she was very forthright in telling me what was going on. So I grew to expect that she would be the first person every time. Well, this one class session, of course, there she was. She popped up first on the Zoom screen. And I was looking at the background, and I see a toilet. And I think, what in the world are you doing? I didn't really want to know what she was doing. And she said, oh, well, I got in trouble because I was using the clay and it got all sloppy over the carpet in our living room. So my mother said I have to work from the bathroom now. So it was a fun experience to talk to students in their own spaces. And I think in some ways, the students also enjoyed, my little friends here would visit when I was doing my instruction too. My dog and my cat would often be in the studio that I work at home when I was instructing. So all in all, I think, and through surveys that I gave to the students, they had a good experience last spring. Now, thinking about going into, let's see what this is, into the fall, we really didn't know what was going to happen. Let's see here, stop share. We really didn't know what was going to happen till the last minute. At some points, I thought that there's no way we're going to be able to host students back in a school building. And then other days we think, well, maybe we can, but what is that going to look like? And the administration didn't reveal what their ideas were until the very last moment, which puts some of the teachers, especially the ones like me who have to get supplies ready for an entire year, at kind of a situation where I'm not exactly sure how I can handle this. I was consulting with colleagues that I have at universities, and they were in the same exact situation. And two, when you're working with materials in a situation where there's a virus that's very easily transmitted, you have to take precautions that are unprecedented. So, and no one in the art community really knew what we could do. So eventually I got to the situation where I thought, I want to prioritize safety among everything else. That is the number one thing. So I thought, well, if we're in school, it'll be a repeat of what I did in the springtime, in that the students will be working in the safety of their own homes with clay, and will use the in-class time for discussion, which is a very distanced way of working, or much more than studio work. And it got closer and closer to the start of the school year, and I then discovered that 3 of the 4 art teachers at the upper school where I teach, because of health reasons, couldn't be in the school building, and they were going to deliver their instruction from home. And I thought to myself, if I was a student and I came into the ceramic studio expecting to be having fun with clay, like the experiences that I've had in the past, and I was told we're just going to be talking about clay in the studio, I would be upset, to say the least. So at the 11th hour, I decided, well, let me back up a second. About the same time, I listened to a lecture delivered by one of the chief researchers at Mayo, and he was talking about the newest evidence about transmission of the virus. And what he said was that it's mostly transmitted through respiratory means. And he said, you probably don't have to worry that much about contact on surfaces in the grand scheme of things. So I thought about that, and I factored that into my feelings about what the students wanted. And I thought at the last minute, we're going to go for it. We're going to turn the studio back into a functioning studio, but with many, many precautions. So I'm going to show you now a few images of what that looks like currently. So where are we? We're in the hybrid model. And if you walk into the ceramic studio now, this is thankfully the site. We do have half of the amount of students working at any given time. So classes have been split in half. The students are working, you can see in the foreground, these tables have been separated by some tape so they know what 6-foot distance is. And they're using their own tools, they're not sharing. In the background, you can see a video screen, and this is a really wonderful video system that the school installed that allows the remote learners, the kids that cannot come into the classroom, to tune in and see what is happening in the classroom. And I'm very thankful that we have that ability. Here's a close-up, and the kids are happy. They're working with clay, and I think at this point in our society, experiences like this are extremely important for kids and for everyone. So I'm glad that they have that ability to do that. And it almost looks, other than the masks and the distancing and me spraying sanitizer all the time over the surfaces, it looks and feels very similar to before the pandemic hit, with one major difference. And that difference is interaction between me and students is extremely limited physically. I teach students how to manipulate clay, and much of that success in that depends on the touch that you develop. It's impossible to verbally teach that. Sometimes it's really important for me to get right next to the student and work directly next to them on their work, and that just can't happen anymore, and that's too bad. Like I said, there are students that are working at home exclusively. And I have the camera set up so that they can be part of the class and they can see their peers working, and it's fun. The system that the school put in my room is so sophisticated in that I can change the angle of the camera to zoom in on individual students. And it's really, for me, it's kind of a fun thing. And the students find it fun too, that they see that they're on the screen and they know they're being broadcast to their friends at home. And here you can see another student working on his project, and the person at home sees this. So we're doing the best we can. And I'm glad that the students have the ability to work in studios and to get emotional release through being creative and expressive. I did want to show you one more picture. On my lunch break, I typically go for a walk. And some teachers are deciding to teach their classes now, since the weather has been pretty good, outside. And this is Miss Reed. She's an English teacher at the upper school, commonly is teaching class right in front of Northrop. This would be on the Kenwood Parkway side of the building. And it's a safe environment for the kids to work in, and everyone, I'm sure, enjoys getting some fresh air. Being stuck in the building wearing a mask for 8 hours a day is difficult. So I think I hit on the topics that I wanted to talk about and show you that despite the situation being peculiar, I think adolescents are resilient human beings. And they're, from what I can tell, seeing their situation in a normalizing kind of way. They're making the best of it. Kids are still kids. And that's something I've noticed, that you see the same kind of interactions that I've seen for 15 years between students. The same issues that they have are still there. It's just that there's a little bit of protection going on between their faces, and they're trying their best to be distant. So with that, that's going to conclude my portion of this presentation. And now we'll have some time for questions and answers.
Well, Jim, Maggie, Emma, thank you so much for all of that context and insight into your experiences last spring and this fall. Once again, we invite the folks who are attending this program to ask questions. To do that, you can use the Q&A button located in the bottom middle of your Zoom screen. Just click that Q&A and then type your question. So while we wait for those to come in, here's a question for all three of you. Anybody can jump in. What do you know now about hybrid teaching and learning that you wish you had known before school started in August?
I'm going to answer that in a different way, because I'm learning every day. And one of the more difficult things that still I need to learn is how to deal with the complexities of our schedule. As was stated earlier by Dr. Graybill, that the students are only in person a fraction of the time that they had been before this. Managing content and knowing where the students are at any given time is, like, as one of my homeroom students had said, it's like a full-time job. And I wish I was better organized and I could understand that more. And I think with time, you know, we're all going to get better at this.
I can jump into, I would probably say that I wish I had known that the extent to which just teaching us that we need to laugh at ourselves is going to be important and is going to be productive. Usually the times when I try to model that with my students are the times when we joke around, when we connect. Just the other day I was in class and one of the students reminded me, a minute into class that there's a remote learner in this class. And I thought, oh, that's right. And so I have to, run over and turn on the camera and do the Zoom video. And luckily the students are on top of those things. And so they immediately reminded me, remember that, Kyle is in this class or whatever it is. But we laugh about it, we normalize it. And that I think helps them, because when they have questions about, oh, I thought this was due yesterday, but it was due 2 days ago. And we just say, it's okay. Like we're all learning, as Jim said. And when we normalize that and laugh at ourselves, that goes a long way.
Yeah, I think for me, it was mostly organization based. I mean, I knew that because I wouldn't be in school some of the time, that it was going to require a lot of organization on my part and a lot of planning out and time management. But I definitely don't think I was quite prepared for the amount of time management. And that's something that I've had to learn. But I really do enjoy that aspect of the hybrid schedule because it allows me to plan out my week. Like, if I know that I have a lot going on a Wednesday, I can work on a Monday to make up for that. And I really like that flexibility.
Thank you. This is maybe a question for Jim and Maggie first and foremost. And Jim, you alluded to this in your last response. The hybrid model involves less class time than in a typical school year. So could you just talk a little bit about the choices that each of you is making, or the choices each of you are making to compact or kind of revision your course curriculum with less class time than is typical?
Sure. I'll just be very brief on this. Typically, before this year, students would only work on ceramic projects physically in the school building. Now, after I learned that students can be very successful at home working with clay, I've incorporated that as required part of the curriculum. So the students went home the first week of school with a big chunk of clay, and when they're not in class, they're working on clay projects that are supplementing what we're doing in the classroom.
I would say that one of the biggest things that I'm doing is recording or trying to record any sort of I don't do a lot of lecturing, but if there's any sort of just content delivery that needs to occur, I try to do as much of that as I can recorded and then send it out electronically so that students can consume that at home as part of their individual work. Whereas, prior to this time, that would have been something that I would have done in the classroom. And that's because I mentioned this briefly during my presentation, but I really am trying to prioritize engagement between the students and between me and the students during the precious hours that we actually have face-to-face. And so the discussions, the small group work, the exploring some of the content that's either really difficult or perhaps really requires some specific guidance, I really try to do that in class. So most weeks they'll get a couple 5 to 8 to 10 minute sort of mini lectures that are just content that they can consume outside of class, so we don't have to take that time when they're either physically in the building or zooming into their class.
And this question, I think, again, builds on some of the responses that you've just made. Is there some aspect of your practice that you've adapted to respond to either remote learning in the spring or hybrid learning this fall that you foresee will continue to be a part of your teaching or curriculum design when we are someday back to normal?
I can do that. Yeah, we put together a project this summer. I didn't get a chance to share it, but maybe I'll send it out. It's some people have seen the different sort of dramatic read alouds that whether it's a celebrity has done, or I know last spring there were, certain figures who were doing children's book readings on YouTube that people could sort of watch or read along with. Our 9th grade team took our summer reading, which was the Odyssey, and our 9th grade team read the entire Odyssey out loud on Zoom like this as the different characters with costumes and things, as a way for the students to be able to watch those movies while they did their summer reading through the Odyssey. And the idea behind that was that before they even got to school, they could know our faces, they could kind of know our personalities, we could try to establish some of those relationships prior to school starting. And we found out that the students loved being able to consume those videos while they were reading the summer reading. And it gave us as colleagues an opportunity to interact and laugh as well. So I foresee that being a part of our sort of summer reading curriculum moving forward, regardless of the mode of teaching and learning that we're in.
Consistent feedback that I got last spring from the students was that they were thankful for having the ability to get away from the screen a little bit. Since a great deal of the content was taking place through Zoom conversations like we're having now, the fatigue was setting in. And I heard the students say, oh, I look forward to just working with this clay at home and not having to deal with all of the Zooming all the time. And I listened to that. And that, I know this isn't exactly answering your question, but it is in some ways. I wanted to give the students as much opportunities in my curriculum to get away from the screen as possible.
Thank you. Emma, this question is for you, and it picks up on a comment that you made just a couple of minutes ago. Can you talk about any kind of new learning or new skill development that you've experienced this fall as it relates to hybrid? So navigating the new schedule, navigating different technology, doing greater self-advocacy perhaps than you've needed to in the past, changing your approach to time management.
Yeah, for sure. I think that the two biggest things for me have been learning the new schedule and then the time management. Particularly with the hybrid schedule, it's much different from the schedule that we had last year. And so it took me a little while to get used to, you don't have certain classes all the time, and so there will be days and weeks where your classes won't meet for nearly a week. And so a lot of my time management related to that, in the sense where I wanted to get the homework done, but also do the homework close enough to the class date where it would still be relevant in my mind. And so a lot of that for me has come from staring a lot at the Canvas calendar, which is a program that we use for any alumni that don't know. It's basically a software where teachers can post all of their assignments and information and things about their class, and I can see it all in one place, which is amazing. And then we also have a program called Bear Time, which will tell you during the school day what class you're in, for how long, and the order of the classes. It's like a digital schedule, and I found myself looking at it on days where I am remote or asynchronous and trying to follow it as a way to sort of keep myself in a schedule to know what classes I should be working on. And I found that to work really well because it manages my time for me and I just have to stick to it.
Thank you. So I'm gonna keep picking on you, Emma, because there's another question coming your way. Could you talk about the opportunities you have had to give feedback or offer perspective on your experience with remote learning this fall, whether that's in kind of individual conversations with teachers or in a more formal way?
Yeah, so I mean, we recently, I think it was last week, everybody was sent a survey. So I think that that's probably one of the most formal ways that we can provide feedback. But there's also, going into a teacher's classroom early and being like, I really didn't understand this assignment. And I think that telling teachers that you didn't understand something and why you didn't understand it, I think is one of the best ways to give feedback, because then they know it's not working. And I think that's, the easiest way to provide feedback is just to go in and to use office hours and to use tutorials and free blocks in particular. Anybody that has kids that have study halls, please tell them to use their study halls. It is so amazing when you learn how to use them correctly. But I think that just talking to teachers and advocating for yourself and saying, this is what I didn't understand, and this was confusing to me, is the easiest way to provide feedback.
Well, many thanks to the three of you for taking this time to join us today. And Emma, special thanks to you for Zooming from a car. That is incredible. And we're grateful to everybody who participated in our program this afternoon, and hope that we were able to share a little insight on life at Blake this spring and fall. Thank you.